Previously on the British and Irish Broadcasting Century. In the late 1800s, radio is developed by clever people, including Guglielmo Marconi, descendant of the Irish Jameson dynasty, the family behind the Irish whiskey. In 1902, Marconi heads to County Cork for radio testing. In the 1916 Easter Rising, rebels take over a Dublin wireless school and announce on air, "Irish Republic declared today in Dublin." And after that, into the 1920s, over the Irish Sea, British broadcasting continues apace, as does European broadcasting. The BBC arrives in November 1922, and our latest episode brought you station moves, gardening, and topical comedy on Auntie Beeb. But still not a lot of activity in the heir of Eire. That's Ireland, who's been quietly waiting. So this time, our broadcasting history tale has reached August 1923, where for one episode only, the British Broadcasting Century podcast becomes the Irish Broadcasting Century, as radio historian Eddie Bohan tells us all about Ireland's first licensed radio station, 2BP it was called, and it took to the airwaves briefly in August 1923. It's quite a tale. Oh, and news just in. We have a second guest this episode. The man behind the music, the composer of the BBC News theme, David Lowe, has an album out of BBC News themes, and that is right in our wheelhouse. So David Lowe joins us to tell us all about the album, how he dramatically changed how BBC News was introduced a couple of decades ago now, and how you may even detect a tiny trace of Elvis. You listen very carefully. Was that Elvis? Well, Ireland in August 1923 and BBC News themes in the present day. This is episode 98 of the British and Irish Broadcasting Century. Hello, this is Paul Carenza calling.
This is Dublin calling.
Hello, welcome podcastees. Paul here with our latest instalment, taking the broadcasting history story one moment at a time. Last episode brought us up to late August 1923. Yes, we are telling the tale the very slow way. This episode, we hop over the Irish Sea, where on Tuesday the 14th of August 1923, 2BP went on the air. It wasn't Ireland's first time dabbling with wireless, as Marconi himself had been to the island developing this new technology of radio in the very early 20th century. 1916 then, Ireland became the first country in the world to declare itself an independent state via the medium of wireless. And author and historian Eddie Bohan, friend of the podcast, has done a heap of research into both that and our main story this episode, that is Dublin's first broadcast station. Plus, we also bring you composer David Lowe. He has given us the One Show, Countryfile, Grand Designs, and of course, the BBC News theme. David joins us later talking about his new album of BBC News themes,
including alternative versions, like the 2LO remix.
So unlike, for example, last episode, this time we're more interview than archive, I would say, although we do have a clip or two to share as well. And a couple of quick announcements before we get underway. Future guest on the podcast, we have a backlog of many exciting guests to bring you. Dr. Inya Stanovic of the University of Surrey. She's an expert in early recordings, going back far before broadcasting. And Dr. Inya Stanovic is part of the team behind a new conference later this year, the Early Recordings Association Conference. It's Guildford, 1st to 3rd of July 2025. I'll be there the morning of the 1st, presenting about the earliest BBC recording, which is 1924, 23rd of April, King George V. New information I will be bringing to the conference on a quest for what happened to that recording. It's pretty much the only BBC recording until about 1932. There'll be loads of other academics and experts on early recordings. I've just snuck in as well. I'm not an academic. Details, if you Google Early Recordings Association Conference, or there'll be a link in the show notes of this episode. And even away from the conference, if you can't make it, if you're interested, you can join the Early Recordings Association, give it a Google, and sign up if you are an early recordings aficionado, amateur, professional, expert, collector, whatever. Dr. Inya Stanovic, who heads all that up, will join us on the podcast and introduce us to some wax cylinders. So it's not quite broadcasting, but there's a big crossover with what we do here. Also, in a couple of episodes' time, we turn 100. Yes, 100 episodes. As I said last time, if you would like to send me some words or a voice memo about any favourite moment that we've covered so far, it could be Nellie Melba singing in Chelmsford in 1920, the BBC's boozy launch of Savoy Hill perhaps, or Arthur Corbett Smith's Egg Week at the Cardiff station, or, of course, Peter Eckersley and his wild freewheeling, do get in touch with me, paul@paulkerensa.com, that's paulkerensa.com, and tell me your highlight of the story so far on the podcast. We will then have a nice little compilation episode for the British Broadcasting Century's Century, episode 100, coming soon. But now to episode 98, and to Dublin in August 1923, as told in 2025 by Eddie Bohan. Delighted to welcome to the British Broadcasting Century podcast now, Irish radio historian Eddie Bohan, and author of many books as well. Is it all Irish broadcasting history or a bit of other things as well?
A bit of other things as well. So I kind of specialise in Irish broadcasting history, but I also, my other nice hobby is I work on public house histories.
Oh, great.
Which I have to frequent to do my research, of course.
Of course. I can imagine they probably had a bit of extra fun than visiting old radio stations. So, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So the ones I've written on the radio is I wrote A Century of Irish Radio, which is 1900 to 2000, which catalogues the history of Irish radio, but also focuses on where we had an explosion in Ireland of pirate radio. So pirate radio, we had almost 1,400 pirate radio stations in that period from 1900 to 2000. One of those being, the other book was Rebel Radio, which talks about the use of radio during the 1916 Easter Rising. Yep, that's the one.
I'm holding up to camera, not that a listener would notice, but I am. There you go.
Yeah, so that's, Ireland became the first nation in the world to be declared by wireless in 1916.
Wow.
And my latest book, I suppose, the reason we're here to talk today is on the history of 2BP, which was Ireland's first licensed radio station.
It's the perfect time to speak to you because we're trying to keep things vaguely chronological where possible on the podcast, and we've come up to August of 1923 and this bizarre tale of 2BP in Dublin. So which is not the first time, bizarrely, that we've encountered 2BP on the podcast, because that call sign had been used before, hadn't it?
It had, yeah. Originally it was a call sign identified for the Marconi publicity department. So they had originally used 2BP in London at the car show, and then had taken it up to Glasgow, where they were trying to encourage people to buy Daimler cars. So that they used a 2BP moniker for both of those stations before they arrived over in Dublin in August.
At this point, then, in the 2BP story, I suppose, then this is a different radio station than those pop-up ones before, and the Marconi company to bring it with them. But well, I mean, give us the background then, I suppose, because Marconi, to the degree to which they are welcome there or not, I suppose is something that maybe the story involves.
You have to remember that Ireland has just come through a war of independence and then a subsequent civil war, which was quite bloody and divisive. So it had just, we were only a couple of months since the cessation of hostilities. The Postmaster General at the time, a man called J.J. Walsh, who would have inherited a post office system and a telegraph system from the British when the Irish Free State was formed in 1922. He had enough on his plate as far as he was concerned. But there was a clamour for radio. We were already listening to radio from Aberdeen, from Cardiff, from Manchester, from London, even picking up American radio stations, European radio stations. So there was a general interest in radio. And then it was being reported that Belfast was to get its own station.
But not everybody was a fan of broadcasting, and some saw Ireland as a wonderful reprieve from the non-stop broadcasting you could hear all over Britain. From an Irish newspaper of the day. There is at least one benefit of science from which we in the Sastat are at present immune, and that is broadcasting. Broadcasting in England has added a new terror of existence. You cannot escape from it anywhere. If you call into a cafe in the morning for a cup of coffee, you'll hear it, harsh, metallic, worse than the worst gramophone, worse even than the tinniest orchestra. At lunch, you cannot escape it, not at dinner, in the barber's shop, or the Turkish baths, once a haven of rest. It will grate on you.
It was incumbent upon the new Irish Free State government that the Irish Free State should have its own radio station, which was all well and good. But again, money was tight. J.J. Walsh had his hands full with the post office itself, trying to reorganise that into an Irish equivalent of the British system. So he didn't really want to get involved in radio. So he asked in August 1923 was the first Dublin horse show after the cessation of hostilities. So it was a big event in Dublin. There would be a lot of British visitors as well. So it was a unique opportunity to, showcase radio. And I think as far as J.J. Walsh was concerned, if he invited the Marconi company, who was well known in Ireland, to come across and set up the station, that maybe they would get the run of getting a proper license. So Marconi already had been involved in Ireland. Of course, his mother was Annie Jemison, the famous Jemison distillers, and much of the money that Marconi, first money that the Marconi company got was primarily from Irish grain manufacturers in Ireland. So most of the money that he got in the first investments in 1898 was from Irish businessmen. So he had a great connection with Ireland, and of course he had the Clifton Wireless Station, which was transatlantic. But during the Civil War, it was destroyed by what was known as irregular forces or anti-treaty forces. And he put in a very large claim, even though we've discovered subsequently that he had always intended to close the station. It was no longer viable, that he was going to move all his operations to England. So, putting in a large claim. But it was a large loss of employment in the area. So part of the way that the Irish government, the new Irish government, which was strapped for cash, was trying to appease Mr. Marconi, was to give him this temporary license, hoping that maybe he would go full throttle. So he actually had two licenses. He had the first 7-day license, which was for Dublin during the horse show. And for the subsequent 7 days, he was able to go down to Clifton, to the local horse fair down there, and broadcast from there. So he had two separate licenses.
Okay. Fascinating to think that it was built around this event, this horse show. Without that, you haven't got the same urge to broadcast.
No, you had no focal point for this. And again, at one stage when the discussions was about setting up a radio station, again, the Postmaster General wanted nothing to do with it. They were going to invite the RDS, the Royal Dublin Society, to be the ones to set up a station. So it was kind of it was a test case, a test broadcast to see how broadcasting would work. Now, unfortunately, Postmaster General J.J. Walsh, who didn't actually have a seat at the cabinet table at the time, even though today the Minister for Communication does, he went off on his own bat and never consulted the cabinet. So he kind of invited Marconi, who came across with their equipment into Dunleary, and they set up in a hotel just on the seafront and the port front in Dunleary called the Royal Marine Hotel. Brought their transmitter, the studio, a man called Louis Wilson, assisted by Frank Clark, both Marconi employees. They set up the transmitter, put the aerial up on the roof of the hotel, and used a room up on the second floor with even the hotel staff deassembled and reassembled a grand piano up in the studios to broadcast.
Wow.
So the focal point was to broadcast to the horse show. So the wireless receiving station was to be in the horse show, but anybody within a 50-mile radius was able to hear it. And at 11 a.m. on August the 14th, on 390 meters in the medium wave, 2BP goes on the air, with the first voice being Louis Wilson introducing the station. And the first artist was a woman called Miss Victoria Clark Barry. And Renee Flynn, who would have been the second woman on the air, they spoke afterwards about how this newfangled equipment just shocked them, how much equipment. And Renee Flynn said the amount of static electricity in the room, it was quite shocking. No pun intended, I don't think.
Yeah.
She was interviewed in the 1970s before she passed away, speaking about it, and it's fascinating to hear.
People were paying their fourpences or the sixpences or whatever they paid them to go in and put on headphones and hear us singing out in the Marine Hotel in Dunleary. They set up a piano in a room and they had a telephone. And we sang into that telephone in the room at the Marine Hotel in Dunleary. And that was the beginnings of anybody knowing anything about broadcasting. But they were not doing it on a wide open base. It was only between Dunleary and the RDS.
She went on to appear on nearly every radio station at the time. 2RN when it started, 2BE in Belfast. She was on 2LO in London. She was on 2ZY in Manchester. She was everywhere. But the first time she had broadcast was from the Royal Marine on Dunleary. And she was just fascinated by the amount of equipment that was brought across. So they would come on at 11 in the morning and they would broadcast till 2. So it was 3 hours. And then they would have 2 hours off. And then they would be back on the air at 4 and they would broadcast till 7.
Right.
So it was two blocks of 3 hours.
Okay.
And again, you're asking artists to go out to Dún Laoghaire. And I mean, Marconi company were paying for this. They're paying for the transport out to Dún Laoghaire. They're paying the artists. But some artists just didn't no interest in it. So the crowds assembled in and around the wireless. You had to pay an extra 6 pence into the wireless tent to hear the station. But all these wireless manufacturers and sales shops in and around the city all set up. There was reports of over 2,000 people down on a small street called Henry Street outside Hogan's wireless shop, listening to these Irish people broadcasting, and Irish voices broadcasting on 2BP. So it was a huge event, well received. Newspapers had a fair amount of coverage of it. The trade papers had coverage of it. There was hundreds, if not thousands, in the RDS queuing to get in to listen to this newfangled device. But at the same time, what would be then, as he was the chairman of the executive, now Taoiseach, the Prime Minister of the Cabinet, he was visiting a visiting judge from New York, Judge Colohan, who was staying at the Royal Marine Hotel. And in August 1923, we were at the start of a general election campaign. And he arrived out in the Royal Marine and suddenly saw all this apparatus and asked for information on what the story was with this 2BP radio station. And there was a certain panic, A, because of its popularity, B, because the Postmaster General hadn't consulted the Cabinet, and C, they didn't know what the power of radio would be in a general election campaign. There was a certain amount of politics involved. And 2 days later, on the 16th, after 3 days of broadcasting, a military outback rider arrived out to the Royal Marine Hotel with a note from W.T. Cosgrove, the chairman of the executive, telling them to close the station. That was a short and sweet exercise. But it was fully licensed. It was the first licensed radio station in Ireland. Was very popular. And Louis Wilson from the Marconi company wrote a scathing letter to the Irish Independent newspaper after being told to stop broadcasting, scathing of the government for, in his terms, wasting their time coming across and then wasting the talent that was already had been used on air. Like, he actually even considered setting up a station for Ireland in the UK so that Irish artists go across to Wales to broadcast into Ireland.
Oh, wow. Gosh.
Sort of a la Radio Luxembourg.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, yeah. And it must have been galling then to have done it all properly, licensed and everything. This isn't pirate or anything. And then 2 days later, essentially, the minds of the authorities have changed because of that, not getting everyone on board to begin with, I suppose. Yeah,
lack of communication, and there's a certain amount of, skepticism about radio, what it can do, what the power of it was. It's still in its infancy. But Irish people who were listening to radio were listening to British voices, British music, and to suddenly hear Irish voices and Irish music, even though a lot of it was operatic, with mainly sopranos, baritones, and tenors being on the air, it was still a joy to hear. One of the Mr. John Gill, who was the director of the choir at St. Patrick's, he'd done a lot of the introductions on air, and people were delighted to hear a Dublin voice, not even an Irish voice. But for people in Dublin to hear a Dublin voice, it was a unique experience. And, if they had been allowed to continue, God knows where we mightn't, our national broadcaster mightn't be in the mess it is in today.
Well, it's a troubled start, but a fascinating one. And I should, just in case any listeners made the mistake I did of thinking, oh, this is the horse show being transmitted out there to listeners, but it's transmitting to the horse show, isn't it? This is the
horse show. It's the showcase. It's the first one after the War of Independence, so it hadn't been run for 5 or 6 years. It's the first big one back. They were looking for that kind of spark of something different. They used to have an industrial fairs event connected with the horse show. So it was like the Dublin Horse Show still is to this day, one of the biggest cultural events, social events, sporting events in the city. Lasting for 3 or 4 days. So it was a big event. And, this newfangled medium of radio Like, it's not just listening to dance music from, London Savoy, or, music from Manchester, which we were listening to. We had these wireless fates. So local organizations, sporting organizations, would have tents set up, including our very illustrious Gaelic Athletic Association, GA, in Croke Park, where you could come in and pay your 3 pence and listen to this wonderful music that we didn't get in Ireland. We were very traditional Irish airs, river dance not on high speed, but on 78.
Yeah.
There was a cultural change coming in Ireland, and the young people just didn't want the same old stuff. We were a new nation. We wanted something different. And people listening to, the broadcast from Manchester, from Cardiff, from Aberdeen, and even later from Belfast. I mean, the major complaint in Belfast was we had no Irish station in the southern part of Ireland. And yet anybody who was listening to the Belfast station, no offence, but they had to end up listening to God Save the King at the end of every broadcast.
Yes,
that was not Holy Catholic Nationalist Ireland.
Absolutely, yes. And actually, those fates that they were broadcasting to then, of course, not from, but it's a very similar origin story to the BBC in London, and Arthur Burrows, the first voice of the BBC, going out there and putting on these broadcasting two fates and two sporting events, just like you say as well. So very similar model. And indeed, also the fact that this 2BP broadcast was so successful, too successful in a way, and they're worried about it. It sounds very much like the Melba broadcast from 1920 as well. Too successful, and then the government panic and pull the plug, essentially.
Even the letters into the trade papers in the weeks subsequent to the closure, the complaints, what had the government done? Like, you're giving us a nice carrot, and then you're snapping away from us without, really explaining the reasoning behind it. Because there's nothing in the papers as such to say why it was taken away from them. But you can read between the lines. It was a kind of a J.J. Walsh had gone off on his own, and it was a bit of an election campaign.
On which then, so how does it go from there? So it shuts down after a couple of days. How long does do the listeners have to wait until they hear something once again start up?
For the Irish point of view, so you had 2BE started in Belfast in September, officially October 1924. But the Irish government then decided they'd set up a wireless committee within the Irish Parliament to decide who would get the licence. And a man called Darrell Figgis, who was an independent TD with nationalist or Republican leanings, but he was originally born in England, but he had been a major part. He was involved in drafting the first Irish constitution. He became involved in the Wireless Committee. So the Wireless Committee was basically set up to decide whether broadcasting in Ireland should be state-run or a commercial enterprise. And again, because J.J. Walsh, as Postmaster General, wanted nothing to do with radio, didn't want it in his department, he leaned heavily towards a commercial private enterprise. And one of those, what they've done is he got a meeting together in Dublin Castle with a number of manufacturers and interested parties. And like the BBC, they set up the Irish Broadcasting Company, a kind of a disparate number of people, to apply for the license. And that seemed to be the way it was going. And then Darrell Figgis, very controversial character, wasn't happy because there was a man called Andrew Belton involved. And he was a British citizen. He had fought in Morocco on an opposing side, and he was known as the Sheikh of Morocco. And he'd arrived, and Figgis thought that Belton was in it just to make money. That it was he wasn't going to do for radio what the Irish government wanted radio to be. So he brought it up before the Dáil. He said that Mr. Belton wasn't a fit and proper man to be in charge of radio. But it turned out that Belton had given Darrell Figgis money for his election campaign in August 1923. So, I think Belton assumed that the quid pro quo was to get the license. So it all exploded. It was a fiasco. It was a major scandal, a major inquiry within the Irish Parliament at all. And Figgis was disgraced. And eventually, because of the disgrace, it was immediately abandoned to commercial enterprise, and the state would run it. So the state set up what was known as 2RN, which began broadcasting, a state company broadcasting on the 1st of January 1926. Now, for Darrell Figgis, it was a disaster. He was married, lived on very fanciful Merrion Square. He was attacked by anti-treaty forces in his home, where his beautiful red beard was shaven off, much to his disgust.
Gosh.
His wife couldn't handle the terror of the raid on their house. So one night she got into a taxi and she went up to the Dublin mountains, and using a gun that was given to her by Michael Collins, she shot herself dead in the back of the cab.
Wow.
6 months later, Figgis abandons Ireland altogether. He has had an affair with an 18-year-old Gaiety Theatre dancer called Rita North. She becomes pregnant. They go to London to get an illegal abortion, which complications she died from. And the day of the inquest, which was medical misadventure, he was in the court, heard the verdict, and went back to his guest house in London and committed suicide himself. So a very dark start to Irish radio.
Gosh, it is, isn't it? How bleak, how many bodies. Gosh, yeah, that's not the happy start that you want it to be. It seems to have been a fairly torturous journey then, in terms of obviously not just those very bleak moments, but yeah, the 2BP origin story, the 2 days on, 2 days off.
Again, Marconi wasn't happy because he wasn't able to go down to Clifton, and he wasted money. They packed up everything on the fourth day or fifth day, I think, back onto the boat at Dunleary, back to Holyhead with their equipment. And Marconi decided he'd continue with the compensation claim. No surprise there, which he eventually did get.
Well, the full story is in your book, The History of 2BP, Ireland's first licensed radio station. We'll put the link in the show notes as well. I urge people, listeners, go and get the full works from Eddie Bohan's marvellous book. Thanks for joining us, Eddie, and thank you for illuminating us both here on this podcast. And I urge people to go to your blog and put the links of that in the show notes as well.
You're sort of an inspiration, because it's a great period of radio history, and like you encouraged me to do more research on the Irish radio, that part of that history, because I had been concentrating on the pirate era, but I can't really talk about the pirate era unless I know where it came from.
That's a very good point. Well, bless you. You're very kind. I know you've been a good friend of the podcast since the beginning, really. And we met a couple of years ago, and it was great to almost one of the first people I've met who'd actually listened to the podcast. So it was great to sort of go, oh right, people do actually listen to this, and there's a bit of a community that's built. So it's great.
Came across the Frank Milligan angle,
the Frank Milligan story too. Absolutely, yes. And Frank Milligan's, was it son, grandson? Got in touch with him. It all helps tell these stories. So
it's all linear broadcasting.
It's all linear. It is indeed that. It is indeed that. Thank you for joining us, Eddie. Keep telling those tales. And once again, get the book, The History of 2BP, Ireland's first licensed radio station, from Eddie Bohan. Thank you, Eddie. Do add Eddie's books to your collection. While you're treating your eyes to his books, here's something you could buy to treat your ears. David Lowe's new album of BBC News themes is out now. It's on Spotify, Apple Music, that sort of thing. David has composed themes for countless TV and radio programmes, Grand Designs, Countryfile, Newsround, and of course, the famous BBC News Countdown. Let's meet him to hear more. A lovely chap. Following this music, composed by him, let's meet David Lowe. Let's mention it up front. You've got a new album out of your fine work, haven't you?
I have, actually, of the BBC News theme music, which has been quite a long time in the offing, in a way. We've always talked about doing something. Even when I did it 25 years ago, there was an idea of doing an album or a single or something anyway. Last year was the 25th anniversary, which was pretty amazing.
That's flown past.
Yeah, and so I talked about it then. It's taken a while to get together. Have a listen.
Brilliant. So it's called BBC News themes, is that right?
Yeah, so there's a lot of themes out. There's a lot of remixes out there on YouTube, and people have done some amazing things with the news theme. I'm really thrilled at what people have done with it. Obviously, people have got stuff off the TV and put that on, and in all the comments it just says, "Well, no, when can we listen to this on Spotify? When can we listen to this on streaming?" And so what I've done is compiled, I think it was about 10 tracks altogether, of some of the main themes. Obviously, the Countdown is the big one. And all the others are just variations of that, really, of that theme. There's the sombre Countdown that we recorded at Abbey Road Studios with the BBC Concert Orchestra. That was in 2013, I think. And there's also some other longer mixes that I did work, which were almost like the concept mixes I did way back when it came out in 1999. And so I put those on as well, which is fun. I can't wait to see what people think of those. And there's also the World Break Filler music we did for BBC World back in 2001. And when we recorded it, it was all done in an afternoon, and they were talking about what they needed, this sort of break filler music that lasted for 30-second chunks with a little joiner in between that they could run in the ad breaks on BBC World. They went down an absolute storm, and people were writing it about them. And so in the end, they released a CD called BBC World the Music. So yeah, there's a nice selection there, I think.
The news themes have really captured, I think, the public mood, and it feels so current, contemporary. I can't believe it's 25 years old, and it feels as well like it was quite a shift from the news themes of the past to this very modern field and that countdown timer and everything that tells you we're almost channeling the pips and channeling the timing, like you've got to be here on the hour for the news, it's coming, and here it is. You know, it's quite a dramatic change from how we had it before, I think.
Absolutely. It was a massive change, actually, and that was the whole idea, that they wanted to completely start with a clean slate and have something completely different and completely new that had never been done for news music before in the UK or in fact around the world. And of course, before that, remember the old news themes of the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, they used to be all orchestral and quite sort of big sounding and big, important sounding and grand. And so they wanted to get away from that feel. And it almost had become a little bit cliched news music, actually. The and you still get a lot of that in lots of countries around the world, still have that feel. So they wanted to get completely away from that and start with a brand new idea. And the wonderful thing about the BBC, of course, is because it's financed by the licence fee, they can afford to be much more creative. It's not a business thing. It's not a worry about, is this going to offend the audience or are we going to lose people? It's about, let's be really creative. Let's be original. Let's move things forward. And having that freedom of the BBC to be able to do that was absolutely fantastic. So yeah, a complete change of gear for news music. And in fact, when I'd done the music beds for the headlines, they were testing them out in the gallery at the BBC, and the sound guy was going, "Oh, right, so is this the demo then? Are we going to have more of this, or is this, obviously this is just the basic thing?" And they said, "No, that's it. That's what it's going to be." And he was like, "What?" Yeah. Because it was so different to what they had before.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'll just feel like they're heralding some sort of important announcement thing, whereas this seems to be we are counting down to important information that we need to engage with and everything. I love that on Twitter, on social media, I've seen your videos where you break down and build up elements of the theme. Just a taste of some of those elements. How do you build up something from scratch?
So the main theme, we were looking for a sound that would hinge everything together, hook everything together, that could be used in loads of different ways across the BBC network. Sound that I sort of sprung to mind when we were talking about really instantly recognisable sounds was the BBC PIP, the Greenwich time signal. That came up as, wow, isn't that an amazing sound? And I sort of sat there thinking, maybe I could use the PIP as the actual sound of the music, because it's obviously a musical note as well as just being a sound. And maybe I could be really radical and add a dance beat to it, the 4/4 dance beat, and do it on the every second. So they could actually use, maybe if I got it in the right key, they could use it and segue from the actual pips into the music, so it would neatly combine the whole thing. And the pips was perfect in a way. The more I thought about it, I thought, well, it represents accuracy, represents reliability. It's been with the BBC since the BBC began. So it's already a sound that you recognise instantly that belongs to the BBC. And so I started with the pip as the basic layer. Then I added a dance beat on top of that, or a bass drum. And then the next bit, while I was playing around, was the bass line. And I was pretty much just jamming in the studio, putting these tracks together. So I got the bass line, and I got the pip going. And I thought the bass line could be dum 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 dum, which is like a very sort of big beat around the world. It's called Tresillo. You hear it in South America, you hear it in Africa, you hear it in India. It's a very global beat, and it's also, of course, across the span of music from rock and roll, or nothing but a hound dog, dong dong dong.
Oh,
Right up
wow.
to Ed Sheeran, dong 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 dong. So it spans generations and it spans the globe, and so for me it was a great representation of a global feeling. And I hadn't thought it through at the time. I just thought I really like this beat, and I put it in. But then I thought, oh yeah, that's what it does. So you've got the pit, the beat, and then the bass line, and then there's two other really big elements of the news music. One is the big drum that goes boom boom, because we were looking for a sound that could signify each headline as they came in, and so I came up with this boom boom big drum sound. And then the other really important factor was the chords in the music. Chords are the emotional bit of music. They're the thing the emotional DNA of music. They're the thing that really affect the way that you respond to music, and they're the ones that give you the sort of feeling when you're listening to music. And well, that feeling could be happy, it could be sad, it could be angry, it could be joyful, it could be exciting, it could be mellow. And you can do all that in a million different ways, subtly with different chords. But of course, with news music, it has to be quite neutral, because the stories can change every day. So it has to be something that could fit any type of story at any time. So I came up with just the simple idea of a minor chord changing to a major chord. And it gives the idea, minor gives you the idea of slightly sort of anxiety, not a very nice word to use for news, but yeah, uncertainty almost, anxiety, a little bit of we don't know what's going to happen. And the major chord gives you a feeling of resolution, of comfort, of yes, of holding everything together. BBC, so the minor is the news coming in, and the major is the BBC clearly processing it and giving you the accurate information.
Gosh, that's a great philosophy behind it. That unsettled world, but it's all going to be okay. It's a wonderful thing.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what we need to hear constantly, isn't it? Incredible to think that you could have the alternative. It's all okay. Oh, it's going to be terrible now, but yeah, well done. Don't want that. You've nodded to it as well. At first, I'd never thought that Elvis was channeled in some way into the news thing. I'm going to listen out for that now. But the way that, as you said, you've got the pip, and on this podcast, we love BBC Heritage in the early days and those things. The way you've got the past, but also it's very forward looking. That mix of the two is fantastic. Next, if any requests for future, Lily Bolero, I think we're due to have her back again. The old, bit of that.
I actually did the music for BBC World Service back in 2007. I did the whole sort of rebrand of the World Service. I think at one point we did use Lily Bolero. I think I ended up doing a sort of modernised feel of it. And actually I did that for John Simpson does a show, and he wanted a reflection of Lily Bolero in that theme tune. So
I'm going to listen out for that as well. These little hidden Easter eggs that you can spot. And I should mention as well the other things like the One Show. There are so many things, lots of great formats and shows. The Countryfiles and things. There's so many things. Your website has more. You can have little snatches and things. I urge people to go to your website, davidlowemusic.com, and they can find out not just about the new album, but also there's little snippets of things that you've done in the past, and indeed, I'm sure, the future as well. They're constantly making new programs and need iconic themes. And we should say then, your album, BBC News Themes, is out. Well, by the time this podcast is out, it will be out now. It'll be week of release. BBC News official themes.
You can look at it up on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok and all those different mediums. It's really great is the way that it took off on TikTok. I did this TikTok explainer video when it was the 24th anniversary last year, and I thought I'll do a little TikTok video just to show how it goes together, because people seem to love, especially on TikTok, they love explainers.
Definitely,
how things happen. And so I just put it together, and I sent it to Chris Cook at the BBC in the newsroom, and I said, what do you think of this? It's the 21st, the anniversary on Friday, and he said, wow, we hadn't realised it was happening, and he said, leave it with me. So he played it to his colleagues in the newsroom, came back, and they said, we all love that, we'll put it on all socials. And so we ended up doing a whole day on the Friday, the anniversary, replaying some of the old countdowns, and just making a nice little thing about it. And then the TikTok video went absolutely bonkers. It went viral with about 4.5 million even got a light from Stormzy, which was...
There you go, collaboration.
It's been great. Yeah, it's been really good.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, I do find you've got to nag the BBC sometimes. When they had their centenary, I saw the November 14th day coming up, and I thought they've not trailed a lot. And then I was in touch with David Silito at BBC News, and he said, apparently, oh yeah, is it our anniversary on Friday? No one seems to know. We thought we had it last month, so we should probably talk about that. But they're so busy looking forward that, you know, they forget when the anniversary is.
That day, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. We've got to nudge them. Well, thank you once again. David Lowe Music is the website. Go forth, buy the album, folks. And thank you, David, for all you have brought to our ears and those reassuring notes as well that clearly every hour we take for granted, but actually are telling us unsettledness abides, but it's all going to be okay. Thank you, David Lowe. Buy his newly released album, BBC News Themes. The link is in the show notes, or you can find it on Spotify, Apple Music, or a variety of online music providers right now. And thank you, Eddie Bohan. His book on the history of 2BP, Ireland's first licensed radio station, is also out now. And generally, do look at the show notes of this and each episode for various links, including you'll also find where I am on tour right now with an evening of very old radio. I may be coming to a village hall or art centre near you. I probably am not coming near you, but if you would like me to, get in touch, especially if you have a venue or a group I could speak to, all of that sort of thing. Coming up, the Religious Media Centre Conference this June, where I'll be whizzing through a century of religious broadcasting, and a summer festival, which I can't mention yet, but more information of that soon, where I'll be doing similar. I do requests. You know, so if you want a show or a talk or presentation to a place near you about the origins of, let's say, children's programmes or early sports broadcasts or music on the BBC or news, whatever, you ask, I do. But mostly my touring show is either called An Evening of Very Old Radio, or once or twice I've toured it as The BBC and Me, Then and Now. Still weighing up which title's best. Either way, it's the same show. Away from touring, you could support this podcast if you'd like on Patreon. Thank you if you do. You will notice no adverts on this podcast compared to many. That's because our support comes from patrons. £5 a month, and I read old books to you on the early BBC, or talk about other things I'm researching, or share nuggets that I have found. Patreon.com/Paul Carenza. The next Patreon video I think I'll be recording is all about communication I've had recently with the Royal Archives. What do the Royals have on the early BBC that we haven't really known about till now? Or do they have it, or don't they have it? Well, I'll tell the patrons first, and I'll tell you here soon enough. And then I'll tell the Early Recording Association conference later this summer. Okay, episode 99 awaits. And that is because at time of recording, it's almost the centenary of the passing of Godfrey Isaacs. Who he? Well, he's the under-recognised head of the Marconi company, and according to one of next episode's guests, we can thank Godfrey Isaacs for coming up with the idea of the BBC in the first place. So next time, academic David Prosser and Godfrey Isaacs' own great-great-grandson, Robert Godfrey. They join me and we get right into all of that. And also, hopefully next episode, if we have time, we'll cover the Sykes Inquiry of August 1923 that's been building and brewing throughout those early days of the Beeb. And I'll bring you all the details next time. Subscribe and that podcast will be yours for free, unless, of course, you chip in on Patreon, in which case it's not quite free, but I thank you for supporting this and keeping us afloat. And after that episode, we're on to episode 100. Let me know your highlights. Now is a good time. Email me, paul@paulcarenza.com, for that or anything else. And all that remains for me to say is... The British Broadcasting Century is presented and produced by me, Paul Carenza. Original music is by Will Farmer. You can find us on Facebook and maybe Twitter or Blue Sky. That's safer for the future, isn't it? Yes, BB Century on most of those. You won't find us on the BBC website, of course, because we're nothing to do with the present-day BBC. We're only talking about the early days, you see. Archive clips are public domain as far as we know, but if you disagree, do let us know. We're just here to inform, educate and entertain. And join us next time for episode 99. Oh yes, you could stick a flake in it. It's the British Broadcasting Century.